Hey guys, today we're going to be working on pedigrees and learning what a pedigree is, and then a lot of practice on that concept. So we're going to start on page 4 in your notes packet. If you don't already have that out, pause this, get that out. Let me pull up my screen so I can go along with you. Let me share my screen real quick. We're going to be on page 4. First, we're just going to go through this little spot in the notes packet together. And then after we finish this little page right here, you're going to get a worksheet that gives you a lot more practice on pedigrees, and you'll work through that with me as well. So first, we got to go back and hit this idea of Punnett squares really quick. So yesterday we learned about Punnett squares. We learned how it's the random sorting of gametes and then all the possible combinations of those gametes. You figure out the genotype, then you figure out the phenotype and the probability of what could be in the offspring. The important thing to note is that Punnett squares are probability calculators that show the most likely outcome of a genetic cross, but it's important to note that reality does not always follow exactly what the Punnett square predicts. Depending on what class you're in, you may have done some sort of coin flipping thing, but even if you didn't, you can still think of this concept. You know that if I flip a coin 10 times, statistics shows, on average, I should get heads 50% of the time and tails 50% of the time. Just like a Punnett square shows me if this is what my genetics look like, I should get, tall plants 3/4 of the time, short plants 1/4 of the time. But in reality, could I flip a coin 10 times and get heads every single time? Yeah, I could. It's not probable, but it's possible. So those two words, there's a distinction that we have to understand when we're looking at Punnett squares. They don't show the guarantee of an outcome. They just show what's most likely. So can there ever be an outcome that is not shown on the Punnett square? No. That's one thing to note. If my Punnett square, I'll use the ones from yesterday as an example. If my Punnett square doesn't have a possible allele combination that would give me a short plant, I can't have a short plant in that offspring. We'll look at the one from page 3 to demonstrate that. This Punnett square right here, none of those genotypes would result in a recessive trait. So I'm not going to have a recessive trait in the offspring. It would be impossible to get that no matter what. The one exception to that would be if there was a random mutation that happened from one generation to the next, which can happen. I mean, all mutations had to happen at some point, right? So there could be a mutation, but we usually consider that unlikely to happen. Most of the time, if it's not shown on the Punnett square, it's going to be a no. However, does the outcome always look exactly like the Punnett square? That's also going to be a no. Because like I said, you can flip a coin 10 times, you should get 50-50, but sometimes you don't. So I could have a Punnett square that looks like this. I could have a heterozygous cross. Statistically, I'm supposed to have 25% of my offspring, homozygous recessive, short. The recessive trait should be shown. It's possible that I could do a heterozygous cross and get 100% of my offspring short. Like I could have 4 offspring actually made and they could all be short. That's possible. It's not probable, but it's possible. So moving on from that then, just because like Punnett squares show prediction, they don't show reality. The thing that we use in genetics to show reality is pedigrees. A pedigree is another tool that shows inheritance patterns within a family. Pedigrees use symbols to indicate an individual's gender and whether or not they have the trait. So here's the symbols that we use for pedigrees. This is always going to be the case. Squares are boys, or how I sometimes say it is boxes are boys, circles are girls. All the time, that's what you're going to see in a pedigree. If it's shaded in, like if the circle or square is shaded in, that means they have the trait. You have to be careful because sometimes the trait we're talking about is dominant and sometimes it's recessive. So you can't always assume that shaded means dominant or shaded means recessive. No. Just read the problem and it'll tell you the trait that you're looking for. So let's do example number 3 together. Example number 3, this pedigree tracks the trait of height in pea plants. Shaded individuals are tall, which is the dominant trait. So I know that for this pedigree, this specific example, if I see something shaded, it is dominant. And I already know the letters I should be using just because I'm kind of running with the same example as we did in the Punnett square. So I'm going to use the letter T. So if something is shaded, it's showing the dominant trait. There are two ways, two different allele combinations you could have to show the dominant trait. You could have capital T, lowercase t, or you could be homozygous dominant. You could have capital T, right? So if I'm trying to figure out the genotype of a shaded individual, it's kind of like a puzzle. I have to use context clues to figure out, is it this one or is it this one? And that's why I usually start with the easier ones, which would be, in this case, it's actually going to be easier for me to figure out the genotype of a non-shaded individual, because if shaded is dominant, that means non-shaded is going to be recessive. And I know there's only one way to get a recessive trait. I have to have homozygous recessive. I have to have two lowercase alleles. So for any individual on this pedigree that has an open circle or square, it's going to look like this, lower t, lower t. The genotype is going to be homozygous recessive because that's the only way it could show the recessive trait. And again, I know that unshaded means recessive because the problem told me. They said shaded plants are tall, which is the dominant trait. That's how I know all that information. So when you're solving pedigrees, the goal is to kind of figure out what's the genotype of every individual in this family tree. So we start with the easy ones. Every unshaded individual is going to have lowercase t, lowercase t. Doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl right now. Eventually later in the unit, that will matter, but not yet. We're just starting simple here. Okay, cool. I did the easy part. I filled in everything that I know for sure. Now I have to go back and figure out all of my shaded individuals because I know I have two options for them, right? I know they could be heterozygous or they could be homozygous dominant. So which one are they? And the clue lies in either their parent or their offspring. You have to look at the context around that individual to figure out what allele did they get from their parent and what allele did they pass on to their offspring. So let's look at this guy first. Actually, sorry, that's not a guy, that's a girl. Remember, boxes are boys, circles are girls. So this circle right here, well, if you trace back up to her dad, right here, this would be her dad. Her dad had a homozygous recessive genotype, only two lowercase t's. So her dad only has one option to give her. Her dad had to give her a lowercase t. Therefore, this individual must be heterozygous. We know she has to have one capital T because she's showing the dominant trait, but the other one must be lowercase because that's the only option she could get from her dad. Okay, let's look at some other ones. Well, what about this individual right here? Could we figure out her genotype? If I look at her offspring, look, she had a kid that has two lowercase alleles, which means they got one from the dad and one from the mom. So she has to also have a lowercase t because that's what she gave to this kid. So anytime someone has a homozygous recessive child, that means they had to be a carrier. They had to have that trait carried in their genotype. So she's also going to be heterozygous. Okay, let's keep working our way up the chain. So what about this guy? Could we figure him out? Is there a possibility we can't? Sometimes we actually can't deduce it and we're left with just saying this or this. Like sometimes you cannot figure it out and that's okay. But most of the time you can figure it out. So this guy right here, I know he has to have at least one capital T because he's showing the dominant trait. What's his second allele? Well, trace back up. What did he get from his dad? He had to get a lowercase allele from his dad because that's the only option he had. So his second allele is going to be a lowercase t, another heterozygous. Okay, the last one we try to figure out here is the mom up here, this shaded individual. So again, since she's shaded, she's showing the dominant trait. I know her first letter is going to be a capital T. The second allele, let me look at her kids. Does she have any kids that have homozygous recessive? Yeah, she's got two of them. Look at those guys. They both have a lowercase t, homozygous recessive. So that means they had to get a little t from her. She must have that carrier allele in her genotype. Okay, we figured this one out. Let's do the second one, and at some point, I'm gonna have you pause this and try to do it on your own, and then I'll just show you the answers. But let's get started together. Okay, example number 4. This pedigree shows the recessive trait. Ooh, we're showing a recessive trait now. So this will be good practice for like the opposite way of thinking. The recessive trait of texture in pea plants. Okay, shaded individuals produce a wrinkled pea, which is the recessive trait. So I'm going to make a little key for myself up here. Shaded equals recessive, which equals wrinkled. In this specific example, we're not looking at height anymore. We're looking at a brand new trait. We're going to be talking about texture. So if they are recessive, they are wrinkled. Okay. The opposite of that, I'll just put this right here. If it's like unshaded, that's going to be the dominant. And the dominant trait would be round. Like it's a plump pea versus a little tiny shriveled wrinkled pea. Okay, let's use, what letter? I don't want to use T. I was going to say T for texture, but that's what we used for height. So let's just use R for like round. So if they are dominant, I know they are either homozygous dominant or heterozygous. If they are recessive, I know they have to be 2 lowercase r's. Again, I just made up that letter. You can use whatever letter you want. I typically choose letters that look really different when they're uppercase or lowercase, so it doesn't get confusing. If you used a W here, I mean, imagine how confusing that could get. They're not that different. So let's start by this time. The easy ones to start with are going to be my shaded ones because they only have one option. So let's go through all of the shaded ones first. We're going to have little r, little r, little r, little r, little r, little r. Okay, now I want you to pause the video, take a stab at the other open circles and squares, and try to figure out, are they going to be homozygous dominant or are they going to be heterozygous? Remember to look at their offspring and their parents. If you can't determine which one they are, then you would just do like this. You would say, put like both of the genotypes side by side with a slash, write it small, say that would both be the options. Okay, pause it, then come back and I'll fill in the answers for you. Okay, this is what we should have. Both of these parents would be heterozygous because they had this kid that had the homozygous recessive genotype. This one, we don't know because they could be, like, there's no offspring to give us any clues. So they're going to be either or. They're going to be possibly one, the homozygous dominant or the heterozygous. Okay, let's look at this guy. This guy has to be heterozygous. Whoa, hang on. This guy has to be heterozygous because he had a homozygous recessive offspring. He had to give the lowercase allele to that kid. And these ones down here, these girls have to be heterozygous as well because that's the only option they could get from their mom because their mom was homozygous recessive. Okay. And that's how you do pedigrees. So at this point, I want you to pause the video, pass out the double muscle pedigree worksheet. Everyone needs a copy of this. And then once you all get that, you'll play the video again, and I'll give you like an intro on how to start that worksheet together. Okay, so pause the video while I pull up my own worksheet. Okay, let me check the time really quick. Hang on. Oh gosh. Okay, so double muscle using pedigrees. This worksheet goes through a specific example. Some of your classes learned about this the other day and some of you didn't. So I'm just gonna do a brief overview. There's a trait in cattle called double muscling, and it's a recessive trait. And it means that the cow basically makes like twice as much muscle as the other cows. So sometimes it's a good thing if you're trying to like build up muscle and grow the beef to sell the beef to eat the beef. But also it can be a negative thing because it harms their skeletal structure. So their bones are a little bit more brittle. This paragraph talks about a guy named Walter and his challenges with growing his cattle herd. So I want you to take a second to just read through this paragraph. You can pause the video if you need to. And then look back at what I've underlined and underline the same thing. Okay. Once you're done reading, let's look at this pedigree below. Walter makes a pedigree of all of his cows, which is kind of cute because they all have names. Oh my gosh, so sweet. Except don't forget they're all going to be like butchered someday, which is kind of sad. So don't get too attached. Okay, so we have a pedigree, and honestly, not a lot of the cows have double muscling. One thing we need to do all together right now, I realized when I printed this packet, the printer doesn't pick up this shading. So you need to shade, oh gosh, I just crossed out his name, but you're gonna need to shade Lance and then the key to show the actual shading. So take a second to do that. I'm gonna erase mine just because I want you to see Lance's name, and mine's already shaded. So take a second to shade. Then we're going to flip over to the back of the assignment. Okay. Help Walter out by adding the following information to the pedigree. I kind of just want you to start here. You don't need to go through the pedigree initially and try to figure out all the genotypes. Just figure them out as you go through the questions because it'll kind of guide you. Okay. We're going to add information to the pedigree. Jesse and Kirk had 2 more calves after Nero. Omar, a male, and Penelope, a female. So we're going to go up to Jesse and Kirk. They're right here. To add Omar and Penelope, I'm just going to do this. Omar's a male, so I give him a box. Penelope's a female, so I give her a circle. Does it tell us if they have double muscling or not? Let's look. Oh, Penelope is the young female calf who was double muscled. She shows the trait. We should shade her in. Uh-oh. I'm going to try to do that lightly so you can still see her name. Shade her in on your pedigree. Okay. Walter talked with the previous owners of Dora. According to the previous owners, Dora once had a male calf that was double muscled. So let's go back up to our pedigree. We'll find Dora. She's right here. So Dora at one point with another bull had a calf that was double muscled. So Dora was also with this guy, whoever he was, and they had a double muscled male. Okay, so this is going to be important information for us. Let's go back. Walter also reveals, I'm right here now. Walter also reveals that Alex has never been on his farm. Walter had Bella artificially inseminated with sperm from Alex. Amidst the paperwork telling Walter about Alex's genetic history, he sees that double muscling is not something that Alex is a carrier for. So Alex is not heterozygous. So that will help us determine his genotype. Let's go back and look at our pedigree. Let's find Alex. Okay, Alex is right here. So we know that Alex is showing the dominant trait because he is not shaded, and normal muscles is dominant. Because remember, the double muscles is recessive. Okay, so Alex is dominant. He's homozygous. We're going to use the letter M to show our genotypes here. So we're going to give him 2 capital M's. MM. All right. At this point, I'm going to have you work through the rest of these questions on your own. The sub has a key with all of my answers written out. So if you need help, call him over and he can help walk you through those answers. You're not going to be able to figure out every single cow's genotype. Some of them are going to be possibly homozygous dominant or heterozygous. You can't deduce it all, but you can figure out some. So go through the questions, do your best, ask the sub for help each other out. Let me think. Maybe let me help you out with your key just real quick in case you need the help. If we are recessive, if we are shaded, that means the genotype should be 2 lowercase letters. So start with your shaded ones. They're going to be the easier ones. If it's dominant, remember there's 2 options. They could be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. And that's where you would have to use your context clues to figure out which one it is. Okay. So finish this worksheet. This is due today. You need to turn it in today. If you're struggling, you have options for help. So talk to the sub. He can help you out. Talk to other people. Help each other out. When you finish this, look at the options on the whiteboard for additional practice and enjoy. Have a great day. Right. Give me a second to stop this because it's always a little awkward when I stop the recording. Okay.